Welcome to Will's Personal Development Show podcast. Today we're going to be doing a quick summary of Arnold Schwarzenegger's book Total Recall. Now, the comprehensive book summary and notes, which is a lot longer because this is a very long book, is in on my blog post on my site, willyoulaugh.com. But this is a fantastic book, and I wanted to do a quick summary. So if you're not familiar with Arnold, you might be living under a rock, but he is and was one of the most famous action stars of all time. He's an actor, but what you may not know is like his whole life is a success in many ways. He grew up in extreme poverty in Austria, became a European bodybuilding champion, then a multi-year international bodybuilding champion, then a real estate millionaire in California, and then became the world's top actor and then the governor of California. I think what people don't realize is he was a millionaire before he started getting successful in acting through real estate. And one of the first things I learned from the book is that this guy was very business savvy. I mean, I think maybe there's a false assumption because of his accent that he's like slow, but it could not be further from the truth. This guy was very sharp and very business savvy. You know, he had a lot of good financial principles around, for example, really only focusing on what he could keep and invest as his real income, and knowing that like it's really what you take home after expenses that matters. He emphasized that a couple of times throughout the book. So this guy really was a business person first. Even when he was an actor, like he analyzed marketing data and promotional data, and he looked at a lot at the numbers to identify, is this film going to be successful? And he would use that data to identify how he could promote the film, or if his promotional and marketing afterwards was successful. Like a lot of the work he did to promote his films, he felt was just as important as his acting. So as you can tell, really interesting guy on multiple levels. So I think I'm going to do like a top 5 thing just to keep this digestible, and then just go from there. So another thing that you might find very interesting about him, and by the way, if you want to just like, I think if you want to just like get a summary straight from him, just jump to the last chapter in the book, because he does this thing where he kind of just, like some books do, just like summarize all his top principles for success in the final chapter. Now, I really do think that no book summary or book summary app or anything like that will truly give you a comprehensive view on biographies, because there's so many nuances and stories that really flesh out and emphasize his character and all his experiences. So I really recommend reading the full book. But you know, that last chapter is a good jumping point, or at least something to get you started into some of the tips there. Now, pulling from that last chapter, one thing he emphasizes is a principle called never follow the crowd. Go where it's empty. So this is something that I've always done, but even when I do it and how I've learned to do it, it's nuanced because of that. So I do it, and I did this before Arnold, and I read this book, and Arnold told me to, but I think he gave me a more thorough understanding of how to do it and when. I would mostly do it when I feel like because I'm a student of psychology. When I feel like crowd psychology is just unthinking, as in the masses do something because others do it without individually thinking if that's the right thing to do. And that it may be even simple things, like there's often times when there's 2 lines, and then the line that's more convenient because it's like closer or looks more like the default line is like sometimes twice as long, when in reality at that restaurant or grocery store or whatever, they're serving or offering the same thing. So I encountered this phenomenon at my school cafeteria, and I think there's just like this false assumption that, oh, this is the right line and this is the wrong line, and people don't think for themselves. So I usually like save some time by just going to the quicker line. In Arnold's case, he thinks about this in a more macro sense. He sees how average people will kind of follow the crowd on small things, like not going to the famous restaurant where everyone else is going to avoid the lines, but on big things uh, they will not. So what he means is when everyone was told to buy a house or not buy an apartment and invest in housing rather than renting, Arnold was doing the opposite. He was renting at a time when everyone was investing in houses, uh, which is interesting. I think he did end up investing hard on a lot of properties and buying properties, but for himself and his own like living situation at the time, based off a few factors, he felt renting was the better option. Uh, and while everyone else was just trying to get any role in a film or TV show, Arnold was trying to be the leading man. And, that also caused, some issues in terms of finding an agent because, not every agent is going to be a champion for you, especially when, he had all this against him. He was, told like, no, you'll never get a part in a film because you're a guy with this huge accent and all the lead people are these slim characters at the time, and he was this bulked up bodybuilder. So there's a lot going against him. People were telling him he would never make it as an actor, and yet, despite all that, he was like, I want you as an agent to only find leading roles for me, and that was also very, very revealing because I think there's nuances to it. A lot of people can come to that in different ways. Like, there's people who might do that nowadays out of ego. They might be like, I want to be a leading role. And then the agent might be like, you're new to acting. You don't know what you're talking about. That's not how you do it. And then they might be like, okay. Or I'm going to do it my way anyways, out of ego, because I want to be the leading star. And then they don't follow their agent's advice and they never get booked for anything. So what really is the right way and wrong way? I don't know exactly, but I definitely kind of vacillated on this just for fun when I thought about it. I was like, because I read a lot of books and biographies of actors. I read Bruce Lee's biography too, and I'm like, just out of fun in my head, I'm like, should I do that? Should I not? Should I avoid being typecast? Should I lean into being typecast? I see like different philosophies. And then I'm like, well, if I, lean into being typecast and then make the most of my roles and interpret them in different ways, I could show on screen that that typecast doesn't necessarily hold true. And I also get some of that income. And I was just kind of deliberating these things as I study these successful people. And I think in Samuel Jackson's masterclass course, which I took at masterclass.com. By the way, you could get a little discount if you go to my affiliate link, willyoulaugh.com/masterclass. He basically says that, lean into, you don't always have the luxury of choosing your parts. So lean into that typecast role that you've given and then show a different interpretation of it. So it kind of made me vacillate on that, but I think the big point is on a macro level, don't always do what the crowd does, okay? Because if you do what the crowd does, most of the time you're going to get the average result. So, put that into account. If the crowd in the modern days if everyone is trying to be that leading man and only taking leading man roles, maybe there's an opportunity there for you to get those supporting roles. And that's something unique that you bring to your agent. So it's not necessarily about this one size fits all, always be a leading man, always only force your agent to look for leading man roles. It's more about the macro philosophy behind that. Okay, so that was tip number 2. Let's move on to tip number 3. Don't be afraid to fail. I mean, this guy was super optimistic. He was super okay with doing these crazy things and really not caring if he failed. I mean, and he got a lot of flack. He got a lot of people, even his wife, telling him like, I don't think it's a good idea that you run for governor. And there's some legit reasons behind it, and he did kind of take that all into account before. It wasn't like he just immediately committed. Like, he wavered for a bit on whether to get into politics because he had to factor in some serious concerns. His wife was a Kennedy and had been in that world a long time, and there was a lot of issues with that. You lose your privacy, and you're always wrong or hated by some group of people. And his wife really just wanted him to focus on his children. And so I think, you know, the point is, though, in my opinion, is that here's a lot of times where he was just told, like, there's no way you're going to succeed. He was told that in acting. He was told that in uh, government and politics, for a variety of reasons that arguably are legitimate. He was told, you have this crazy accent, you have this ridiculous last name, and it's like, it's just not the archetype of most traditionally seen successful actors. And you have this monolithic body, and the leading men at the time had these slim body profiles. And then, politics wise, as you can imagine, there's obviously stuff around his just lack of experience in politics, and him being this world renowned actor. And it was just like, he didn't care. And he was like, I think one thing he said that stuck with me is like, if you fail, so what? Everyone was expecting you to fail anyways. You don't really lose anything. It's net loss zero. But if you succeed, if you accomplish what was thought to be impossible, man, that just is a knockout of the park. So I think that's really something you need to look at. You need to look at those asymmetric situations. Sure, you get all the hassles of your family and friend telling you you're going to fail, but so what? What do you really lose by trying to pursue your dream? Now, yeah, Arnold could have been lucky. You could have done the same thing, and 9 times out of 10, maybe 100 times out of 100, you do fail. So there may be luck involved, but I think it is a very interesting way of looking at the world. And of course, I think there's a lot more method behind the madness that Arnold used to increase his chances. Don't just fling yourself into some I don't know, acting job without plan. I mean, and you'll see this if you ever actually read the book. His venture into politics was very much planned out, articulated. It was like months, maybe even a couple of years of networking, learning, and partnering with some of the greatest minds in government in California, and really learning from them, leveraging his movie star status to like get meetings with them, and really kind of like invite them on set while he was being fitted or filmed to sometimes get that meeting. And of course, they were starstruck by the film and stuff, and it was just fantastic for getting in there. And then he did a lot of research. He did his due diligence. So there's a lot to it, but very interesting guy. Now I want to pause here after point 3 and just emphasize that once again, this guy is, a lot of things happen to make this guy who he is. And you might be thinking, oh, I'll never be like that. Or he's just too successful. And I feel you. I kind of feel the same way in certain instances, but just take it one step at a time. I don't think you necessarily need to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. You don't need to be this multimillionaire successful person. I think even in his book, he did a quick mention, I think towards the end, where he was just like, you don't need to be what I want to be. But I think we can all take something from him to improve our lives and make it a little bit better. So just keep that in mind. Okay, tip number 4, don't overthink. This was one that really stuck out to me because I'm an overthinker. And he mentioned it a few times in the book. I think the most pronounced instance for me was how he kind of imagines some of the things he did when he plunged into certain areas of life, like politics, like acting, like real estate, like moving to a different country. And he said that if he had really done all the due diligence and really figured out how hard and difficult and all the steps were involved, he would have never gotten started. And so, in a sense, his naivete pushed him forward. And for me, that just kind of caught me by surprise because there were definitely many life situations and life decisions where I probably just did so much research on it before taking the plunge. And while, some research and planning is good, you don't want to end up like the, you know, group of travel influencers I read a news article on a couple years ago who ended up dying because they went to this waterfall and they fell off. Very tragic situation. Like some degree of planning around safety and all that stuff is important, but on the other end of it, there's certain times where as long as like you're not gonna die from it and like physically you're gonna be fine. Like sometimes it's okay to just be like, yeah, I'm just gonna plunge into it. Don't overthink it because that'll paralyze you. And I think he emphasized a few times throughout the book how he never let his like overthinking happen. He was always the type to just kind of plunge into it. And I think he didn't let his peers, who would oftentimes tell him like, "Oh, marriage is such a hassle. You're gonna have to do X, Y, and Z." He didn't let that put him in the point of paralysis or cause him to do excessive research or just stop him from moving in. And that proved to be his benefit because he never would have started as he would have said if he did. All right, the final tip, and of course I have so many more tips, so many more things in my blog post, but the last tip is really around turn your liabilities into assets and don't blame anyone else. So he kind of ends the book, and this one really stuck with me. Um, but for him, it was just natural throughout the book. It was just like, but I think it was a good lesson for me. Um, he was like, if you grew up and your parents were too soft on you and you became too soft on relying on them, don't blame them. If your parents were too hard on you and you became too cold and they were too stern and hard on you, don't blame them. It's on you. It's on you to make the most of your life, and you got to take life by its throat. Uh, Channel that into something positive. Turn it into something better. Uh, Arnold kind of saw the negatives in his life in a way as positives. So Arnold's dad was like very harsh on him, kind of cold on him, and he was empathetic to that. I guess later in life, he was like, it wasn't necessarily his dad wasn't a bad guy. It was just like it was a result of the sentiment of the entire country because they had lost the war, they were in like a recession, and they had nothing to show for it. And so his dad would have been a different person in a different time, but he was very cold and harsh to Arnold, uh, and also told him how useless it was for him to spend time weight training, and he would hit Arnold. But instead of like using that to like demotivate him or like ruin his life, he was like he actually he used it to motivate himself. He wanted to prove his dad wrong. And later in life, I guess when writing the book, he wrote in the book that if his dad wasn't that harsh, he wouldn't have been motivated to prove him wrong, which would never have spurred him to do any of the achievements he achieved. Like he would have succeeded in bodybuilding, which may have meant he never would have gotten the green card to come to the USA, and like none of the other stuff would have happened. So I mean, incredible story. The chances of this poor Austrian boy to do all this stuff is just incredible. And another part of turning your liabilities into assets is just how hard Arnold worked and how hard he kind of used that by kind of leaning into it. His accents, his big muscles, all that things ended up becoming his strengths. Because I think once he started being successful, like he leaned into it. Those are the things that basically people started to look for. Uh, Conan the Barbarian. That film, the director basically said, uh, if Arnold didn't exist, they would have had to build an Arnold because they needed that muscular body type. So rather than saying, "Oh man, I have all these muscles and no one will ever hire me for acting," he stuck at it, he kept at it, and he started to find roles. And he also, I think, personally, I think he started to shape a different look, a different persona as the desirable action star lead. And it made a lot of sense, a bulked up, muscular guy. I mean, that's something that people can see as more masculine, athletic, and so forth, and strong. So, for certain roles that came out, like Conan the Barbarian, it started working and working. So you never know. Don't just discount your weaknesses as weaknesses. You just never know where the world may lead. So just to summarize and wrap it all up, uh, it is a strange world. I can't really say myself that I have it all figured out. I don't know if I will ever really succeed like Arnold did. I don't think so. I think that would be fantastic, but I don't necessarily need to. There's things I would love to do one day too. Like I'd love to get into a little bit of acting. Um, I'd love to, further my passions and turn them into income, and then really help a lot of people. But it's not always cut and dry. You try all these things, you throw it against the wall, and nothing sticks. So I don't know if Arnold's tips really are a cure all. They probably aren't. But you can kind of take these tips and maybe optimize them, find out different tactics, go against the crowd, turn your weaknesses into strengths, and do all these things that may increase your chances. There's no guarantee. I don't think there's any guarantee about success, and uh, that's something that is something that's kind of sucks in a way, but also it's fine. I think worst comes to worst. We're still gonna live happy lives regardless. We may not be as rich, but you don't necessarily need to be rich to be happy. So just try your best. Take from these tips. Once again, check out my blog article if you want a lot more from this book. That's at willyoulaugh.com/Arnold. And thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you in the next video. Hey, please reach out and let me know if there's certain podcast episode topics that you want me to cover or so forth. Reach out at willyoulaugh.com/contact. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.